Greetings today. It's a pleasure to be back and it's a pleasure to start a new year with you. And as we're getting into the new year, that is 2023, for a start, I would want to appreciate you so much for being a consistent follower and listening and actually engaging with the content as much as you've been doing through the year. For 2022, the start of it wasn't so clear on where we're heading and how things were moving forward. But as a start of the video to channel that we started, we are now able to have actually 405 subscribers. That means the content that I'm creating, the kind of information that is being shared is of value to you, and you're finding it's of essence in terms of your professional development and dynamics within the pharmaceutical industry. And I appreciate you for the 405 people who have subscribed to the channel. Let's keep engaging, let's keep learning. And at the same time, with the 405 subscribers, we've had 5,982 views. That is amazing, actually proof of validation of the concept, and you believe that there's so much more that we can do together. I urge you to continue engaging, continue asking your questions, continue sharing content with me so that we can see what are the next frontiers and how do you shape the future of pharma industry in Africa and the world generally. And on that, so that said, actually the next phase of work that we're going to do, I'll still be doing these Sunday episodes, and the Sunday episodes are basically for me to do deep dives and reviews on particular key emerging trends and emerging issues in the industry, which would be critical. And for today, I'm going to talk about real world data and real world evidence in terms of pharma industry, and how do we harness the potential that lies in real world data and real world evidence. That is important for us, and that is important for you as a member of the industry in ensuring that we improve access to care for patients. Additionally, beyond the deep dives that I'm going to do on every Sunday, I'll be having interviews with thought leaders and experts within the pharma industry, and this would be coming out in terms of different thematic areas, their journeys, and their professional careers, and how do we then consolidate these to shape a common future that is going to ensure that we have access to safe, effective, reliable, and quality healthcare products and medicines in the African industry. So those are the key aspects that's the new growth area that we're going to get in this year. So as we get to that, then the next thing is for you who is joining us today for the first time, take it upon yourself to review the other content that we've created, both from professional development, the different industry trends, career opportunities, career profiles, and how you would grow in that line of work. And ultimately, as you do that, ensure you subscribe so that within the first month or the first quarter of the year, we can get to 500 subscribers. Then we keep driving that momentum, because this is a year for us to win, and for us to win, we need to work towards that goal together. Thank you so much for that. So as I get into the topic, when you talk about real world data, real world evidence, what does that entail? What does that actually talk about? In the pharma industry, our main mission is definitely to ensure there's reliable access to safe, effective, and quality medicines. And these products should be affordable to the patients and the end consumer who we are producing this medication to. And with that said, then you need to ask yourself, what medicines are available in the pipeline? What disease areas are there that people are suffering from? We talk about cancers, we talk about infectious diseases, we're talking about even the degenerative condition, let's say for example rheumatoid arthritis and related osteoarthritis. All these disease areas are there, and there are medicines that are being used in managing them. Are they effective? How are they developed? Clinical trials are coming into space. So when we look at all that scope of disease areas, the medicines that are available, and the possibilities and opportunities that still exist, we acknowledge that there are gaps. And the gaps are in one, certain medications are not working now. When you talk about antimicrobial resistance, antimicrobial stewardship, and related concepts, it means there are certain medicines that are now not going to be effective. And at the same time, because of our own genetic makeup differences, we look at it from genetic pharmacogenomics perspective. A medicine that would work in me would not work in another person. And therefore, then it means we need to see what makes it effective in me that not in that other person. And that is where we're looking at effectiveness of the medication. We'll also look at precision medicine, that we go targeting a particular gene or a particular molecule in your cell that is only unique to you to ensure that the medicine is able to treat you. These are advances that are coming up. And now when we look at all that scope of what care would look like, then we see that there's now going to be additional use of real world data. And when we talk about real world data, before a product is launched into the market, let's say for example we're talking about paracetamol, pain management generally, that is the main line of work, analgesic antipyretic product. So for a medicine to come into market, there's research that is done, and actually there's some suspicion from a researcher perspective that this product is able to do this and this. Then once that suspicion is there, we go into further in-depth analysis and research to confirm that probably actually there's evidence that it can do that particular work that we see that it's going to do for us. Let's say for example, reduce our body temperature, reduce the pain or headache, whatever it is that you're going to suffer from. Then once that is confirmed, then we now move to the next phase, from the preclinical studies to the preclinical again, but within the clinical setting, or not clinical trials. That is the clinical trial, that is what I mean. So the preclinical will have the non-human, that is the lab work that is going to be in place. Then we go into the human trials. That is where we start phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4 trials, as we do them in human beings, confirming the efficacy. Then after that, this evidence and this data is going to be used by regulatory authorities to register the medicine. And if it's registered, then it's now going to be launched into the market. They're going to be supplied for human use and human consumption. But as that happens over time, we've realized that there's going to be additional information, additional insights. That is why over time you'll see a product was recommended to be effective for use, but then it's now going to be recalled from the market. We could talk about the case of thalidomide that was actually found to be having adverse events, but in the initial phase for what it was supposed to be used for, then it was effective. Unfortunately, other than the effectiveness in the indication, it had other side effects, adverse events, which made it to be withdrawn from the market. And those side effects were actually documented from clinical use, real world data, real world evidence of the side effects of the medicines. And that is coming from a pharmacovigilance standpoint and patient safety. So you look at it from that dimension. It is registered, it meets the initial clinical indication. What were we looking for? It meets all that. But beyond what we were looking for, does it have other positives? Does it have other side effects that can be there? We could talk about another example. We'll talk about sildenafil, Viagra, as we all know it most of the cases. It was initially used for hypertension. But when looked at pulmonary hypertension, now from clinical use, there was determination that actually it could be used in managing sexual dysfunction in men, impotence, or erectile dysfunction, not impotence, but erectile dysfunction in men. So that is another use that came in. So when we look at all these new emerging indications and all that, we are realizing that there's so much more that medicines can do. So over time, you'll find medicine started coming into place in the 1900s, 1800s there. Now registration, and as we're moving forward, there's now emerging new evidence about a use of a particular product. For example, paracetamol, from the time immemorial, it has been used. Probably there's some new indication that might arise. There's some side effect that can be noted. And for us to be able to capture this, then we need to use real world evidence, real world data that is being captured from use of patients. And the other avenue that is coming up is because, let's say for this particular medicine, it was tested in the European countries where the advances and development of pharmaceutical products started. In Africa, most of the clinical trials are not happening, and luckily enough, post-COVID-19, there's more advances that are happening. And with these advances, then it means there's so much more we can do to ensure that we test the medicines and confirm whether they are effective in our people or they are not effective. And if they are not, then what alternatives can we bring on board? So it means then if that medicine is now being used in an African setting, there's new clinical findings, clinical imperatives that are going to be generated that should inform the next phase of development, the next phase in terms of treatment guidance, indications, and the quantities that are going to be used. So with that in place, then you need to say there's a lot of data that is being generated. And the data that is being generated either by physicians and pharmacists who are dealing with the patients, generally healthcare workers. Then beyond that generation, there's also another data set that is being generated by the medical service providers. Let's say, for example, the hospital setting by itself, health insurance companies, each and every player in the healthcare sector is generating new data sets. And this data set can ensure that the medicine is safe, effective, quality, but also affordability. What are the drivers in terms of a patient choosing to buy one medicine or not? What is the driving factor between a physician prescribing one medicine and not another? Then once it has been prescribed, the pharmacists will be filling that prescription. Why do they make a decision to probably make a switch? And that's something, the interchangeability of medications and actually prescription switching is some critical conversation that we're having now when we look at it from the biological sector, where we see therapeutics have been in place. Then we now come biosimilars that are we're looking at them and considering them to be similar in terms of therapeutic value from a biological standpoint. But are they effective? Can they be interchangeable? Can they be considered the same molecules? And these advances as they're going forward, then we need to be able to generate real world evidence and real world data that's coming up. So that is the general scope of it. So when you understand that bit, then you also see that some of the medicines have been registered in other countries. They've not been registered in our environment. And the registration probably, let's say, for example, in penicillin in 1940, it was registered in other countries, was effective and all that. Some of the data during, even in terms of documentation and archiving practices, the clinical findings from those days might have been lost, or they might not be as comprehensive as we wish they were. And therefore, for now, then it would mean that being the medicine has been used for a period of time, there's clinical data and guidance that have been captured from physicians, nurses, pharmacists, all the healthcare workers who are dealing with patients and handling these medications. That generated evidence. Can we collect it actually, though not from a clinical standpoint in a clinical trial where we're doing research and generating peer-reviewed and ethically sound information, but it's in clinical setting which is still in ethical practice. Then we generate that evidence, collect it, and present it for regulatory review and approval for registration of medicines. That would be key. But if it's not going to be feasible, then probably some medications will not be registered in countries where the clinical data is not available from clinical trials, as would be envisioned and wished for. So therefore, those are lapses that are coming in. And as those lapses are coming in, then we need to see how do we generate that data? How do we move forward to ensure that, one, the medicines are registered in the countries where they need to be, new information streams are coming in, and that new information stream that are coming in are able to be used in envisioning a better future for us in terms of healthcare practice. So when you ask yourself then, from real world data, real world evidence, why do we need it? And that is the critical bit that we need to know, that before we even get to the point of saying how do we harness the potential of real world data, real world evidence, we need to define what is the use case for this data. One, we need to establish the indications of the medicines. Most of them have already have indications. So for us to actually position them in a particular locality or region for the same indication for which it was registered or it was developed at the initial phases, we need evidence. That evidence can be generated from clinical imperatives and clinical use data to make it valid and actually usable in that demographic and that region. So that is in terms of establishing the therapeutic indication and therapeutic use. The other bit is now opening up additional use areas, additional indications. In additional indication, that is where we say from clinical use, there's been adopted new value that medicine can provide. That is where we could say, for example, the one of sildenafil that I mentioned at the start is that it was for pulmonary hypertension. Now it's being used to management of erectile dysfunction and all that. These are new frontiers. These are new advances. And it's because of the clinical use. If we generate that kind of data, can it be considered reliable and actually valid in repositioning a medicine for additional clinical indications? And some of them would even be for use for particular medications through off-label use of compassionate and emergency use. Case example, during COVID-19, almost every other therapy that was being proposed had not been indicated for COVID before the clinical trials on the vaccines and new products. So in that kind of compassionate and emergency use, can we confirm that it has got clinical and therapeutic value, and it's in a real clinical setting, not research per se, but in clinical setting? Then we generate that evidence and make it position. The other key bit that we could look at it in terms of the affordability metrics and drivers of care. When we talk about affordability, then we ask ourselves, why would a physician prescribe one over another? What are the key drivers that are making a pharmacist prescribe one medication and not another? And what are the other challenges that we are going to have in terms of affordability and uptake to care? And when we talk about affordability and uptake to care, then it's not only about the cost of buying a medicine. It also goes to the point of how much does it cost me as David to come from my home to the clinic? If I go to the clinic, how long does it take me to wait and actually get the care? And when I'm done with the physician visit and the consultations, do I get the medication? What is the cost of that medication that I get from there? And then when I go back home, how does it impact my productivity at the place of work? Because when we look at all these drivers and these cost factors, then we're able to see, is it affordable in terms of uptake of care? Is it economically sound a decision? Because maybe let's say, for example, I go to the clinic, let's say if it's the best, most efficient, 30 minutes I've seen a physician, the next 30 minutes I've seen a pharmacist and I've gotten my prescription, I'm going back home. But the medicine that I'm going to get wants me to take rest, let's say, for example, a day or two. That is 2 days or 1 day of full productivity loss because I'm not able to go to work. How does that impact my productivity and my ability to provide for my family that is depending on me? So these are drivers that we need to look at in terms of affordability metrics. And that is where we now look at what are the sources of this kind of information. Is it the insurance service providers? Is it the physician? Is it the pharmacist? Is it the patient? Because the patients have also play a role in actually giving us this kind of insights. And when we're able to get that real world data, then able to see how do we improve on the design of the medicine so that it doesn't want somebody to sleep longer. And that is the case that we're looking at in terms of the antihistamines. Piriton was actually confirmed to be sedative. And the sedative factors actually make it be recommended for use at night. that is now for the dosing. But also now additional generation of antihistamines were recommended, which have less of the sedative effect because of that development. That is from real world data and real world evidence that is being generated. That is the key thing that we need to do. And also in terms of the formulation of medicines, if I need to take 7 medications, then it means the pill burden would be so much if I'm going to take all of them. But based on evidence that we can generate, let's say for example, a physician has been prescribing 3 medications at the same time, and they have been confirmed to have additional benefits which might not have been linked prior to the formulation of that, prior to formulation of each of them. Then with that information, then a pharma company would say, we are now going to develop a fixed dose combination where we have 3 or 4 multiple products into a single tablet or a single capsule or a single injection. Then in that case, we are reducing the pill burden, making the convenience and uptake for the patient far much better. So when we establish a use case for why we generate that data, we then know who can give us this information, where are they, and how do we get them to provide that information and generate it. Then once we establish that, the next phase is determining the requirements in terms of that data. What specifics do we need in that information? How many patients are using it? Which regions are used? What are the positive outcomes or negative outcomes from the use of the medication? Those are the key things that we need to look at as well. But beyond that, then the next phase is to see how do we move actually after establishing the use case and knowing the requirements of the data that we need in moving it from where we are to getting to actually realizing the potential that lies in this. One key thing is, as industry players and stakeholders, either I'm working for a pharmaceutical industry, I'm a pharmacist working in a pharmacy, I'm a pharmacist working in a hospital, or a physician working in a hospital, a medical consultant working in, let's say for example, insurance company. In whichever sector of the healthcare industry that I'm working in, even if I'm a public health professional working in the NGO world, whichever way it is, I need to ask myself, what are the drivers of healthcare uptake and use among people? If it's about a medicine, what disease areas are we treating? What are the impediments and that drivers of care that are there? What information can I gather that can inform the development of the medicine better? Once we have those metrics and actually we embody that kind of uptake and outlook towards generating new insights and new data, then we can collect the information that is going to help guide us to the next frontier. But the key thing is the driver that's going to be in place is the pharmaceutical industry, because from pharma industry, we're the people developing the medicines, we're the people who know what particular diseases we want to manage better, and we can interface with others to see what information can we generate to improve our product pipelines and portfolio to ensure we serve our patients better. So the pharma industry will need to take lead, but the other stakeholders have to support and have to be engaged to understand this is where we play, this is the role we're going to look into. And even from the other stakeholders, then you can generate the insight and look for a company that has value for that data. That will be critical. We need to have the outlook that we are going to generate information. Once that is in place, we need to form and structure partnerships that are solid and robust. And these partnerships is about, let's say for example, if I'm working for a pharma company A, I need to say, if you're working in the oncology space, what medicines are available in our portfolio? What are the key challenges that we're seeing in care uptake and care utilization among patients? What new information can guide me on whether I'm going to use this information or develop a medicine that improves a particular metrics and not another? Then who are the people who can give me that information? With that kind of a solid baseline, I'm able to reach out to the insurance agencies, medical service providers, physicians, and have partnerships with them, knowing that this is what I'm working on, this is what I want of you to support me with, and how do we work on each other. Then the other bit is, most generation of data comes with physicians and healthcare service providers, and therefore they need to be enabled to understand, what does real world data mean? What is real world evidence in terms of therapeutic development and care plans? Then once they understand and they have a comprehension of what it entails, they're able to support us and work with us better. Therefore, after having some of the structured partnership, they can come after or even before, but they need to build capabilities in individuals and professionals to know that there's what we call real world data, there's what we call real world evidence, and once we understand what it entails, then we need to see what is the reason as to why somebody would need to generate real world data and real world evidence. How do we collect it in our own days, areas, places of daily work? Then once we know how to generate it, then who do we partner with to ensure they have access to the information, and how do we get them to use it better? So structured partnerships and capacity building have to come in and interface robustly. Then the other bit that is going to be critical for us as we get this data and actually generate it as much as possible with stakeholders is to have data science and digital capabilities to be able to, one, collect, analyze, synthesize,
and put to meaningful use. What we're talking about, the fourth industrial revolution to be driven by technology. Technology is an enabler and actually it's a vehicle, but the ultimate key thing that technology is doing for us is one, helping us either generate information or helping us process and synthesize that information. What we need is people who are able to use that information at the end of the day. So at the initial component is how are we going to generate information and develop it and synthesize it to be valuable, to be viable in terms of helping drive business decisions, support development in different pipelines. So that is a critical bit that we need to understand. So we have data science and digital capabilities to ensure we collect, analyze, synthesize, and actually optimize for use these kind of data sets. Finally, in all that we're going to do in the pharma industry, that information needs to be used in developing a product or improving on a product and positioning it in the market. Healthcare industry and the pharmaceutical sector generally is one of the most regulated, and for it to be regulated, then we need to see how do we ensure the regulators are actually understanding the place of real world evidence and data, and how their role in actually accepting such kind of data to inform the decisions. Because if as a pharma company I get some information about the use of a particular product, I develop the product, improve on it, and then when I bring it to the market, the regulator doesn't accept that data, then it will be of no value. Therefore, the next phase is going to be engaging with the regulators and making them understand the value of real-world data and the place of real-world evidence in making medicines and therapeutics accessible, available, and affordable to the patients who need them in their jurisdiction and their places of existence, so that we're able to ensure that the pipeline is self-sustaining, the ecosystem is enabling and stimulating new ways of thinking and new ways of developing solutions. Once we finalize on that, the ultimate bit would be now for us to make it a reality. And those are the key touch points that I feel if we're able to generate the use cases, collaborate, build capabilities across the sector, and have everybody knowing what real world data and evidence means, how they can use it, what is their role in enabling it and driving that kind of transition, then we're going to have a better future of our healthcare systems and a future that is going to be sustainable for all of us in adopting real world data. As you look at this, the key thing that's going also to be there for us, data integrity, data quality. We don't want to compromise on the quality of the information and the data set that we're using in making clinical informed decisions. So the data quality has to be key. That is why we talk about data science and digital capabilities, and also the people who are coming in to understand what are the ethical guidelines and the legal provisions behind it. That's going to be important. Data integrity, because we're dealing with patients and we need to ensure that their confidentiality is intact and the use of that data is actually guided by certain set of principles and codes of conduct. And that is going to be paramount. So as we move forward, let's see that there's a critical place of real world evidence and real world data. We all have a role to play, and as much as we have a role to play, the starting point is to get enlightened, then make a commitment on what is the probable value and use of that data, so that we move to a better future together. Thank you so much for this engagement. This is the first video of 2023, and I'm glad to be back here, and I'm glad to be engaging with you. Let's make the year a successful one as we engage and learn together. Thank you, and have a fantastic one.